This week on the Backtable Podcast.
So ransomware, it is almost exactly what it sounds like. They infiltrate your system, they lock everything down, they encrypt it with their own key, and then you have to pay them to unlock it. That's the gist of it. That's all they do. They're just crawling the internet looking for someone that's gonna, fall for it. They do it, they get their money, and they move on. Because it's important to think of the business of cybercrime as well. And you can think about it as like any sort of criminal enterprise. It takes money and resources to hack into systems, and you need to get an ROI out of it, right? So they're just trying to get in and out, get the money and go.
Today, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity with Didier Jourdain. He is a certified information systems security professional, CISSP, if I'm not mistaken. Didier also published in JVIR. The name of the paper is Cybersecurity for Interventional Radiologists, a clinical imperative for protecting patient data and imaging systems. Didier, thanks for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me.
So what's the deal with your paper right now? Is it fully published?
It is not fully published. It
Okay.
is. I just approved the proof, and it should be ready for publication at any moment, I guess.
I was still able to pull it up and read through it. It's just in that weird format where everything it says journal pre-proof.
Yes, I guess it's one of those where it's available in PubMed, but not officially published. Yeah, it's in that state right now. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so let's just start out. Introduction. I almost introduced you as Dr. Jourdain, just out of force of habit, but can you just give us a little bit about your background and kind of what you do?
Yeah, definitely. Not your typical, member. I'm probably one of, if not the least educated member to ever be on the Backtable podcast.
I don't believe that for 1 second. Don't believe that for 1 second.
My name is Didier. I am a computer scientist by training. I did start off my career as a software developer, and slowly but surely, I moved into the world of software security, and that turned into what I do now, which is mostly the governance and risks aspects of cybersecurity and how to prioritize controls.
So first question is, how did you even get into this? What's the pathway to get into the role or to CISSP?
Yeah, there's a few different pathways, I guess, to get into cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is a little bit like saying medicine. There's so many different avenues to go into. There's the operations side, there's the kind of governance side, there's the engineering side. And I come from the pathway of software, right? So I was a software developer, and I got interested in security or software security, application security. And then eventually I moved in and started working as a penetration tester, which is the best job title ever, which is companies actually hire you to hack into them and then basically tell them how you did it and write a big report on how to fix it. And that was my job. And it was a great job for a little while. And then I moved into more of the just application security side of the house. And I was an engineer working with the software engineers to make sure that the application was ready to go into production. So I did that. And then I moved into the architecture side of the house, which is more of just like an architect of a house, designing the applications and the infrastructure. And then from there, you move on again into kind of more strategic roles. And, you have your cybersecurity budget and spend, and it's where are we going to spend that money to get the most, bang for the buck. And, if we spend a certain amount of money, we would expect a greater amount in risk reduction. So otherwise might as well just pay it.
All right, I'm going to circle back around to your work and kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis. But I wanted to start out and just kind of frame the conversation. And the first question I wanted to ask is so you wrote this paper and you published in JVIR. Why JVIR?
So I work right now primarily with interventional radiologists and other outpatient practices, right? So
you talking the OBL teams and stuff, or?
Yep, OBL teams.
Cool.
Primarily right now, OBL teams. But companies or practices that have smaller to no IT footprint, either it's outsourced or just, with that one person that works there. And not so much hospital institutions where they have larger, more traditional IT departments and even entire security departments.
Okay. So a hospital system, generally speaking, is going to have a team of IT people. And within that IT team, are there people who do your exact job from architect to penetrator to whatever?
Depends on how they're structured, which
Okay.
is a little bizarre. We don't quite have, as an industry, cybersecurity is still quite young, and we don't have quite the same standardization as like a hospital would say.
Okay.
So there are different services, I would say, that are available. So typically in a hospital system, you're going to, since you're not writing software, it's not a tech company, you're going to see a little bit more of the traditional IT security folks. There will be somebody doing strategy. If it's going to be an independent security role, depends on the hospital. Sometimes it's just the director of IT who also does security. And
Okay.
this will be more of like systems administrators who also just do cybersecurity, not so much the engineering or the architecture.
Okay. So that answers the question about like why you published in JVR. I thought that was very interesting. So when you speak to other physicians about cybersecurity, how do you try and frame the concept of cybersecurity? Like, I guess like just looking at your paper, I gathered that this isn't just like an IT issue, but it seems like the paper kind of reframes it, and the way it kind of lays out like how to go about thinking about it is it's not an IT issue. This is actually a clinical issue for you. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes. So a huge part of the paper that I wanted to make sure everybody understood is that, cybersecurity isn't just kind of like that department's job and I have nothing to do with that. It's really a collective of how we treat risk to the practice, right? Or the hospital. So it's really framing cybersecurity as like, it is just it's a clinical risk, not just this IT risk, nebulous IT risk that somebody else deals with. So I wanted, physicians, especially to understand it and to understand their role and how to protect it and how to, the patient care continuity and just honestly just keeping the business running.
So in terms of like when I think about like different types of physicians out there who might have an independent standalone practice, honestly, it's like anytime there's any kind of IT disruption, it's a major issue in terms of workflow. But I was thinking specifically about like IR, vascular surgery, interventional cardiology, like endovascular specialists. Like it feels like our workflow is so like intertwined with like technology. I mean,
It is.
and so is that one of the reasons why like you kind of gravitated a little bit more to like this kind of like specialty? Like, or I guess the real question is, are interventional radiologists, vascular surgeries, and interventional cardiologists, are we more vulnerable in terms of like IT risk than other specialties?
You're a little more vulnerable in the sense of you're so reliant on a lot of technologies in order to run the IR suite that if something goes down, there's a greater chance of not being able to do anything. Like a clinical practice, I mean, on clinic, you might still be able to just see the patient and speak to them, depending. I know there's a lot of other things that go with that, but you can't run the room if you don't have PACS running, right? So it's those things are so critical. And my introduction to interventional radiologist, came from the disclosure. My wife is an interventional radiologist, right? Dr.
Yeah.
Isabel Newton. So that was my first. It wasn't my first introduction into healthcare, but it was my first introduction into just how technology focused and heavy dependent those practices are.
So have you been a part of the healthcare system? And I guess I'm interested to see like at what time points like you kind of enter the picture. Like, have you ever entered the scene where like someone's like bringing you in and say like, hey, we had a breach. This is the problem that we're having. Can you help us fix it? Or are you always on the front end, meaning like, hey, I'm here to help mitigate your risk. I'm not like the person that's like the fixer.
Yeah. So throughout my career, I've never been on the like disaster recovery or incident
Okay.
response side of the house. I've always been on the strategic elements, on the what we do before. I have had to deal with at companies that I work for. I've had to be during an incident I've worked, but I do not come in post incident. That's typically a different skill set that needs to be brought in for those incidents.
So what is it? So talking about like the specific threats, like I wrote down some from the paper, but before we get into like the kind of like broad categories, what is it that you see the most that in terms of like threats that like ends up being like the real threat to like a physician, like either a standalone or even like a big hospital system?
So the biggest risk and biggest trend that I see moving forward is third-party risks. Most vendors are now moving towards a SaaS platform or software as a service, where instead of having something at the hospital or in your office running, it's now accessible in the browser. And it's extremely convenient, but you're moving on that responsibility completely onto somebody else. And you might not fully understand the risks that come with moving that to a third-party vendor. So like your EHR or EMR platforms, even there's cloud PACS companies now as well. If any of those were to go down, cyber incident or not, you probably don't have a backup, or you're going to show up to work one day and you're just going to be kind of making it up on the spot.
Yeah, I can say like working in a couple different like hospital facilities, you're exactly right. Like third-party players are becoming like increasingly common, and maybe maybe necessarily so, just because like the complexity of everything is increasing, and so it's like a lot more tailor-made solutions for things. So cost and benefits on that. Okay, so getting into threats, like specific threats, will you talk about them? Like, just what are the broad categories?
Yeah, so you're only as strong as your weakest link, as everybody loves to say, and humans are the weakest link. So phishing, that is the number one way to get into a system. There's an element of trust, I guess. Like the system, when you click on something, the system thinks you're like, oh, it's trusted. It's inside of our system, and that is the best way, easiest way to get it. It's like calling from a restricted number to try to hide your phone number, but since you can't call them, the way to do it is to get them to call you. So that's how a phishing attack tends to work. When you click on something, that's what's happening.
Can you get a little bit deeper into like what exactly is a phishing attack, and also like specifically like how do these things look? Like whenever I think about phishing attacks, I think of like these emails like of like, I don't know, like a Ethiopian prince who's like, hey, you
Yes.
claim this, like claim your inheritance, or hey, there's this like big Yahoo settlement. If you just click on this link, you got like a bunch of money coming to you.
Yeah, when the deposed prince of Nigeria.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Right. So phishing and smishing and all the forms, they have broadly the same characteristics. It's somebody contacting you, either email, text message, phone call. Now with AI, those are becoming more tailor-made, but at scale. And there's going to be some type of like urgent request, right? We need this now. We need this. It's an emergency. Some sense of urgency. We don't see the Prince of Nigeria things anymore. I feel like people got used to it. But now you get things like your taxes are overdue, or you have some sort of tax issue. It's the IRS. Or now there's even ones that are impersonating your boss or the director of the department, and they need help on a Saturday and they called you specifically. Those are the things to watch out for. Any sort of urgency. I need you to sign this DocuSign right now, which is something that totally happens.
Well, like, but what do they look like specifically, like within a healthcare system, or like, are there some like traits that are more tailored towards someone who's trying to hack like either a big hospital institution or an independent like physician practice?
Yeah, so depending on, I would say, the sophistication of the attack, if they're directly targeting you, because sometimes they don't know who they're targeting, they're just bombarding it out. So it can come in all types of formats. It's frequently caught by filters by your email provider, but if it's more targeted, they're going to try to make it look like something that's real. Like I said, like a DocuSign of like some new HR policy, but it's not really a DocuSign. They can be impersonating a vendor, right? Come to vendor dinner or et cetera, click here for the menu or whatever. So it's always going to require an action on your part. So if you see something non-standard, maybe unexpected, and it requires you to click on something, just have that spidey sense of where's this actually coming from? Because there's this trust relationship that happens with a screen for some reason. There's a level of trust relationship when you just meet somebody on the street, but for some reason, if you just put a screen between those two people, you're willing to divulge a lot more information and have just a higher level of trust.
So one of the things that I was trying to get at is, like, say physicians working in a lot of different hospital systems, am I more likely to fall for a phishing scam that's going to endanger one of the hospital systems I'm working at because someone's targeting me as a member of that healthcare system? Or am I just going to be targeted like the GPOP, like, hey, this Amazon phishing scam, and just serendipitously in them phishing me, they're like, oh, this guy has access to hospital XYZ?
It'll be that second one.
Oh, okay. Got it.
They probably haven't researched you, most likely. Unless they have a very good reason to, they probably have not. And yes, once they get in, then they kind of see what they have. And see, there's lateral movements, right? So it's like once you're in, where else can I go within this? And they might even try to potentially not necessarily impersonate you, but use, again, that like trust relationship that they have of just you and try to see where they can kind of exploit that.
And so like phishing, you also said like the individuals are like the weakest link. What you meant by that, like in terms of phishing, is like individuals who are a member of like these healthcare systems or like independent physician practices. It's more likely like there's a certain level of individual responsibility. Like I mess up by doing something with a phishing scam, and that's going to endanger the healthcare system because I'm the person on the inside. Is that right?
This is true. Yeah. So you are on the inside, and it's like opening the door for somebody and letting them in. So it's going to bypass certain controls. There should be other controls so you don't have these single points of failure where just clicking on one thing takes down an entire hospital. That is a much more complicated conversation. But you are bypassing controls by it is kind of like, oh yeah, we have all these badges and everything to get into the room, but you just open the door and let that person in. That's the equivalent.
Got it. All right. So what do we do about it? Is there like a way we can protect ourselves, kind of like armor ourselves against these phishing attacks? Do we have to just not trust anyone online?
So there's several ways to attack this, right? A big one is education. That's probably the biggest ROI is going to be education, just knowing what to look for and how to spot them and how to report them to your IT department. If there's a little report phishing button or things like that. Simulated attacks as well are a huge one. And probably the biggest one that nobody ever does is just tabletop exercises of what actually happens if somebody clicks on a phishing link and what do we do about it, right? What's that incident response side of the house and that run book so we don't have to make it up on the spot.
So when you say like that strategy, like the tabletop run through, that's something that would be done by like a hospital system. Like they would say, like in this scenario, are they sending out like hospital systems or maybe like practices or even like recommendations by you that you've seen like practices doing this well? What does that kind of look like?
So practices that do it well are running phishing campaigns. So their IT department sends out, you probably see them that you know, this was a simulated phishing, you failed, et cetera, et cetera.
I've never seen that. I've never seen that.
I've never, yeah, right. So we go over those numbers internally. It's pretty demoralizing sometimes when you see just the size of the fail rate, and there's also levels of failure frequently depending on how sophisticated the department is. Sometimes it's just you clicked on it. Sometimes you click on it and it does send you to a fake website, and you check if they actually even, once they got there, when did their spidey sense kick in? And yes, so there's that, and beyond, and then the education program, because frequently it's education can frequently just be this thing that you click through, just like a lot of your other HR training. I've seen places that do it well and places that don't do it well. It's a difficult balance because there's so much other training and so much other stuff that you need to be doing to do it right, to keep you entertained. The best places have done it in-house. They build something in-house. It's not just this like off-the-shelf thing that you brought in, unfortunately. Yeah. It's those provide the best, the best value. And then internally on the IT side, of course, there's a lot of stuff that you can do, a lot of tooling, a lot of strategies to kind of what we call the security onion, where there's layers of defense. It's not what we call eggshell security, where you have kind of a little layer on the outside, it's all gooey on the inside. That's what we try to prevent also. And then we also test things, right? The best practices too are also testing things. Do the backups actually fail over? Like when there's an issue, are the backups connected? Like, do they have a single point of failure? So when that failure goes, now both backups are gone. So like what was the whole point of a backup? That's honestly, those are the best things in a well-run practice.
So it sounds like it's almost like continuing education, ongoing dynamic assessment, and like, you know, on the IT side, it seems like there's a lot of redundancy. Like if you have a well-formed, kind of sophisticated system.
Yep, quite a bit of redundancy is super important. And the redundancy is, I mean, infinite, right? It's like you can have like airplane level redundant systems
Yeah.
because it's so critical, but it might not be worth the cost or the hassle or the upkeep, because now you have to upkeep two systems, right? So there's this huge, and this is where the tabletop exercises are so important, to know what is the skeleton crew, absolute bare bone essentials that you need to be able to just run the day or run the week, if it's papers or not, or what is it going to be, and what could you live without for a little bit, because maybe those systems you're not going to have backups for.
Okay, understood. Let me ask you this. There are some hospital systems where I have to change my password like every single month, or sometimes it feels like every single week.
Yes.
In terms of like strategy, in terms of strategy to like protecting the healthcare system, like how effective is this? Like constant email change or constant password changing? I mean,
so it's not. So all these changing your password every 3 months, there's poor data backing it up right now. It takes forever in our industry, even with data, to actually change the policies that run those the compliance metrics that run those policies. But it's definitely not the best practice, because I know all of us do. We have, we just change that last digit at the end of the password every right?
that's right.
Especially because they make the password so difficult to make,
Oh
right?
man,
It's
yeah, the
like
passwords now are pretty complex.
you can't use hyphens, and you're like, oh my God. So you're going back and like modifying it. And so I would love to see those go away. Passwordless world has been something that has been promised in our industry for years and years. It's sort of showing up, right?
Okay.
You have so in multi-factor authentication, right? It's really, the factors are something you have, something you know, and something you are, right? So biometrics. So the something you know, which is your password, hopefully will go away, and it's something you are and something you have. So I have my phone and I have my face, and so it's those two things. So you see these with passkeys and a few other logins that like Apple has implemented, has helped to prevent some of this password fatigue, I would say, and just reusing the passwords.
Yeah.
But until then, probably the best kind of tactic is to really just know one solid password, and then just to have a password manager. So I use a password manager. So I know very few of my passwords.
All right. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, will you tell everyone what a password manager is? And then just, I mean, not that either you or Backtable gets any cut from it, but which one do you use? Like if someone's like interested.
Yeah. So a password manager is like the bank vault of your passwords. You have the one very protected key, I guess, to get in. It's not just a password to get in, but multi-factor in whichever way you want to set it up, with a code or biometrics. And then once you're in, it's the vault of passwords, and you don't actually ever see the password. It auto populates in the application that you're using, and you don't need to overthink it. I personally just use the built-in one that Apple has. It's good enough for my purposes. Honestly, it's one of those things where like we can discuss the types of encryption that they use all day long and how they use it and all these things. Just using one is just use any of them. Use the one built into Chrome, use the, or LastPass or 1Password or any of those companies it would make every IT person quite happy to know that that one password that got compromised doesn't compromise all your accounts. Because that's the first thing they do. Once they compromise that one password and they see it work somewhere, they're going to use your email and that password across everything to see where it would work.
That makes sense. All right. So we talked about phishing. One of the threats that you mentioned in the paper, ransomware. I've seen this, and I've seen this in one of the practices here in Louisiana. I've also read about it on the news a couple of times. Can you talk about ransomware and kind of what that looks like for a hospital system or even a independent physician practice?
Yeah, so ransomware is quite scary. It's one of the scarier ones, because if somebody steals the data, right, you technically can still work, right? That's a different issue. But this kind of hits both issues of uptime, right, running the business, but then also the data. So you're just dead in the water. So ransomware, it is almost exactly what it sounds like. They infiltrate your system, they lock everything down, they encrypt it with their own key, and then you have to pay them to unlock it. That's the gist of it. That's all they do. They're just crawling the internet looking for someone that's gonna, fall for it. They do it, they get their money, and they move on. Because it's important to think of the business of cybercrime as well. And you can think about it as like any sort of criminal enterprise. It takes money and resources to hack into systems, and you need to get an ROI out of it, right? So they're just trying to get in and out, get the money and go. So that's basically what's going on. There's also another side of it. There's extortionware. As companies have gotten better to protect against ransomware, extortionware is where they actually exfiltrate that data. They actually take it out of your system and then hold it ransom but away. So being like, we're going to release if you don't pay us.
Okay. And is the phishing schemes like a mechanism to then get into a system and install ransomware? Are these two things interconnected, or are they different types of threats, different types of issues?
No, they're definitely interconnected.
Yeah.
It's you always in an attack, there are several stages of an attack, as you can say. Typically, there is sometimes there's a reconnaissance phase. Then you move into the actual infiltration phase. That could be phishing. Typically, there's a few other ways, but phishing is a big one. And then once you're inside, then the attack actually starts. So you need to establish persistence so that they don't just turn off their computer. Now you're kicked out, right? So you need to establish some way to stay in the system, and then find where the data is, and then steal it, lock it down, do whatever their plan is. That's what they do. So it's
okay.
Think of breaking into somebody's house.
Yeah,
you have to get through the front door before you can get to the jewelry box, right, or the safe, right? So it's the equivalent.
Okay. So same kind of line of questions that we talked about with like phishing. Like, what are your recommendations, like as far as like protection and prevention? Like, what do you do about this?
Good email filtering, right? So, for ransomware? Yeah. So best ways to protect against ransomware, it's again like the layered onion, right? So there's the protections of the actual infiltration phase of an attack. The biggest thing that you can do as an outside of the IT department is going to be phishing. That's probably your role in the entire equation.
Okay.
Then it goes into the data, protecting the data. So there's different protections that you can have on a databases that you have everywhere. And then there's backups, and you can create the backup in case the primary fails, but you have to make sure they have to be interconnected in some way, but they can't be too interconnected, because then they just lock down the whole thing. So your backups didn't really count. You have to have backups somewhere else.
So I'm thinking about this like from a physician perspective, whether like I'm a physician within an IR practice, like in a big hospital system, or whether like I'm a section chief or something. If I let's say like I was in charge, like I was solo practitioner, or even like a section head of an interventional radiology program, are there some things that like you from an insider, like there's some things we could go to the IT department and say, basically like a strategy of like give the IT team like, hey, this is like bare bones of what we need to run a cath lab or run like the department. Like, what does that conversation look like, or what are some things that are helpful to like tell IT to like have like a plan in place should something like this happen?
Yes. So involving the IT department, or even the IT department involving IR in a tabletop exercise, is the best way to figure out all those questions of what actually needs to be protected, and then they can decide how they could potentially protect it, because they might be protecting the wrong things.
Right.
And security and convenience also have this big trade-off, right? So there's having that discussion and knowing kind of the zones of responsibility are critical to have defined, to know what IT can do, right? Because they know how to defend a database, but then also knowing your role as a physician of not only just phishing training, but also that tabletop exercise of, if things were to go down, what do we actually need in order to keep running? And that's where all those questions get answered real quick when you do a tabletop.
Okay, so when you're doing a tabletop, like what is this? What does it even look like? So it's like, say I'm going to an IT department, like as like an IR head. I'm like, hey, let's do a tabletop, and IT's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't know what podcast.
Okay, yeah,
but
they're like, we're not doing that.
Or yeah, maybe yeah, more likely like, we don't want to do this. But like, what are some of the things like you can push on and say, look, this is in like everyone's best interest. Like, what are some of the things we can push back on with IT to get them interested, or some pointed questions we could ask maybe?
Yes. So a lot of things are compliance driven and
Okay.
policy driven, right? So if you can point to where, hey, we're going to be out of compliance if we can't, like, we're a level 1 trauma center. I don't know the exact requirements of being a level 1 trauma center, but I'm sure there are a whole bunch of backups that need to be generators, et cetera, that need to be up and running in case, there's a, big natural disaster, for example. And that's probably going to be your foot. So you have
Okay.
hospital leadership that goes like, we need to make sure that this is a redundant system. And then that influences IT leadership to understand what the absolute needs are from the hospital in order to be able to continue to operate. And sometimes honestly, the best learning practices is just like walking up to a server or a system and it's just like unplugging it and seeing what happens. We do that. We do that all the time to make sure if things were, we don't do it during a critical moment.
Sure,
We'll
of
do it like
course.
on the weekend when it's quiet or something, but we just pull something and see what happens. Did the system fail over correctly? Did a lot of your hospital or any hospital practice typically has 2 internet providers in case one goes down. So just pulling the plug on the primary internet provider and seeing what happens. So those are things that all need to be tested. Backups are just theoretical until you've actually failed over to the backup.
All right. So one of the other things that you had in the paper that I like this abbreviation, IoMT, Internet of Medical Things, and DICOM vulnerabilities, because one of the examples here I thought was just like crystallized in my mind why IR like seemed so vulnerable, and it talked about just like a contrast injector. And like we've never had like some kind of ransomware phishing scheme where like the contrast injector went down, but sometimes the contrast injector is finicky, and like this is still like a major problem for me during a case. And so then I was thinking about like the internet of all the little medical things, like the ultrasound machine, or the way my cone beam CT talks to like our server that does like our reconstructions and all these little things. Can you talk about like those kind of vulnerabilities and how those end up being like little tiny gateways into the system?
Yes. So internet medical, or medical things, right? So it comes from just a general IoT, right? Internet of Things, where there are now so many, you can think of them as mini computers everywhere, right? It's not just that one computer. Now there's 15 computers inside of the IR suite or something, right? And they don't have the same level of scrutiny as a big server might have. So they frequently become little, almost like lateral hops for an attacker to move around the network. In the past, it used to be printers. Printers didn't have the best security, so we would use those as to have persistence inside of a system. We would hop into the printer because everything's connected to the printer,
Okay.
and then you would basically, that would be the lymph node that you're hanging out at would be the printer. So that's how you stayed in. And this is what happens to these devices, right? They have certain patient safety requirements that they have to be met, but they don't really have software security metrics that need to be met necessarily. And they're connected to the network. They're not just standalone devices that are, sitting in the room. They are interconnected somehow, and they do eventually can reach the internet. Those are the compromises, I guess, in those systems.
And so, like, if you're advising like a physician practice, what are some of the things that you do to kind of fortify those little tiny computers? Like, what I think about is like I think one time I read a paper about a cyber paper, like it was just something on the newspaper, like an article about like how people or hackers jump into like your smart fridge or like your smart
Yeah.
washer dryer
Mm-hmm.
or something, and they use that to get into like your house of internet or whatever. And so this is what I was saying, this is like the refrigerator that has like a little smart chip in it or a smart
It
computer in it.
is, right? It
Okay.
is. It is like hopping into a smart fridge or any system like that.
Yeah.
And the real strategy there is network segmentation. So this is
Okay.
moving into the IT technical world, but it's network segmentation is exactly what it sounds like. The network is spliced up into sections, and certain devices and things live inside of those little sections, and they can't speak to other areas, or if they speak to other areas, they have to go through a firewall or certain different techniques that you can have there to filter the traffic. So that's the way to do it there. So because we've had pretty famous attacks where the Xbox in the waiting room is actually connected to the entire hospital network. It's not its own separate network. And that is accessible by anybody, right? So you get somebody who comes in and plugs in a device in there, and they have access to the contrast injectors, right? So it's everything.
Hold on, did that really happen?
Not contrast injectors, but yes, the Xbox, yes. That's a true attack. That's a real attack.
Say more about that. Where did that happen? Tell us the details.
I don't know what hospital it was at, but it was part of so typically what happens is the way things work, or the ethical way that things work in our industry is if you discover something or it was part of a job, you do the test, do the attack, or the attack happens, or you find a vulnerability, and then you give them time to fix it, and then you disclose it. So it becomes like you speak at a conference and you say what you did. And I was at that conference where they spoke about what they did. So it had already been fixed at this point.
Okay.
But they were testing a hospital, and everybody comes up with all these crazy ways that they could have like hacked into the system, and all they did was plug in a USB inside of the waiting room. So
wow.
it's
okay, pretty cool. So tell me more about vendor outages and what we can do to kind of like stave ourselves or guard ourselves against it.
Yeah, definitely. So vendor outages and third-party risk in general is probably one of the biggest risks that a lot of healthcare practices face right now. There's a lot of convenience that comes with the all these software as a service products that are moving to the cloud, but you're moving that responsibility onto somebody else, which is great until they mess up, right? So you're still very much accountable for everything that they do. If they go down, if there's a vendor outage for a week, your EHR platform went down and you're unable to practice, that patient's not going to care who that is. You're the problem, right? And there's reputational damage, there's just lost productivity, and all the things. There are protections that you can have in the vetting process. Having a good third-party risk, like a vetting team, is critical to understand how they handle their systems and if it meets your standard. So defining your standard and then vetting them to make sure they meet your standard. And then there's also contractual protections that you can have as well. For example, if you build a system inside of AWS and Amazon Web Services, they will certify certain components to be 99.99% uptime. And if they don't meet that, there are service credits, or you get money back, or other things that you will get in return to recoup some of those losses. A lot of practices I've noticed do not have those things written into the contracts. So if they lose, if they go down and you lost, hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue, there's no getting that money back. Like there's no, other than like, I'm sorry, there's no way. And you might be like, oh, I have cyber insurance, but you make sure to read that policy, because that cyber insurance protects you, but not from them. So they protect from you getting hacked, not from somebody else getting hacked. Or even if the outage is not a cyber incident per se, just having that outage, they're going to be like, it's like having house insurance. And I live in Southern California. It's like having house insurance, but it doesn't cover if your house burns down. It's those fun things. So those are the protections that are critical to have ironed out and understood when something goes down and you're angry.
So this actually seems like a very good segue, because if you're an independent physician practice, and you were the one who's actually poring over those contracts, that seems like something, because sometimes I try and think about this in two frames, like an IR doc who's in a big hospital system, in which case it's well, I don't really see those contracts. What am I going to do? But if you're an independent OBL practice, you're very much seeing that. And you probably do want to outsource a lot of things. It's probably a lot of software or other teams help you do something that they're specifically good at, but having those contracts in place in case you do have an outage. So thinking about the independent practice, or what a physician can do within a hospital system, do you have some top recommendations? As an individual physician, what are your recommendations that you would give them at dinner parties, or the really the high level stuff?
Yeah, so I guess, of course, my favorite thing that I say is running those tabletop exercises, but I'll give you the kind of questions to run those tabletop exercises, right? So it's the, let's just say, EHR is down for 3 days, right? It's the like who calls who, right? How do we keep, doing urgent cases? How do we document and what's plan B, right? So from your vendor, you're going to ask for, RTO and RPO, which is the time objectives and the point objectives. So it's basically how quick do they do their backups? Like, is it to the minute? Is it to the hour? Like, if they went down, did you lose an hour of data? Did you lose a minute of data? Depends on the system. They have different objectives. And also the return time objective, like how long would it take to fail over to the backup as well? So if they can't answer those two questions, red flag from your vendor for sure. Then there's going to be, how do they notify you? Are they going to call you? Is it going to be an email? Are they going, like, what's pager? Like, what system are they going to use to notify you that they're out or down? And also, what service or financial guarantees are you actually going to get, like I mentioned? And then, where's the data stored? How is it backed up? And also, what have you changed since the last security incident? So, all those questions will show a little bit of the inner workings of how buttoned up they are on the inside. And if they can answer those, great. That's a good sign. They're not perfect necessarily, but it's a good sign. If they have something called a SOC 2 report, I would recommend reading it. It might be a little boring, but I highly recommend
sounds like
you
something
read
would be,
because it'll show kind of a little bit about the inner workings of their systems at a high enough level that you should be able to understand what's going on.
does that advice change for, say there's a physician who's working within like a big hospital system like MD Anderson, Mayo Clinic, wherever? Do you have like advice that you try and give those individuals, or like as an individual physician within that big healthcare system, there's just not a whole lot you can do?
There's not too much you can do, to be completely honest. The best thing that you can do is and I would say it this way, if there's a vendor you want to onboard or are discovering, there's going to be a third-party risk management team within those large institutions. Like that's their entire job, is to vet vendors. And if you want to bring a vendor on, I would recommend you get those teams involved right away, because frequently you start building this relationship with this vendor, you get all excited, and then when it comes to the actual, purchasing, you hit a roadblock right there of like, they're not, mature enough for our level of organization. So getting them involved early would be probably the best thing that you can do.
That's still like super good tip. And say that we're a physician, we have a busy OBL practice or an independent practice or member of a hospital organization, and we don't want to do any of this. I was just going to give you an opportunity to like, what do you do for practices? Like if like, I'm just saying, I just know that like being an interventional radiologist sometimes is hard enough. And then when I think about like having to be an OBL owner, which I am not, which Ali Behetti is, that's like a whole nother level of like stuff that you have to familiarize yourself with on top of all this other stuff. Like, so are there people like you're like yourself or other people like you? Are there companies that you can reach out to help you like kind of like outsource like some level of expertise and something that seems pretty important?
It is so niche, I would say, especially for OBLs. It is, it's not just like the healthcare of the healthcare of the health. Like it's like you're drilling down to a very specific IT requirements for OBLs that I would say other practices don't typically have. And it's really the questions that I am answering are, how often is something likely to happen, right? And how bad would it be? And that's really what determines what are we going to do about it. Because if it's cheaper to just pay for it out of pocket, then just pay for it out of pocket, right? It's like, just don't bother with all these controls. They sound cool, complex, and will solve all these issues. But until you determine how expensive that problem is, you don't know how much money to spend on that problem. So,
well said.
Especially OBLs, right? They a vendor comes in and they're like, oh, this is, sure, it's expensive, but it saves them, days in the ICU or et cetera. So it's net cheaper. So the procedure has now gotten cheaper. It's the exact same thing in cybersecurity. And if you're spending on something, it's like, what's the risk reduction that I'm actually getting? Because if you spend $100,000 on a tool, fancy tool, you sure better be getting more than $100,000 of risk reduction. Otherwise, it's a complete waste of money. So those are the questions that I ask, and that's the solutions that I provide.
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how could they reach out to you? Are you on social? Can we give out your personal address?
Yeah, I'm a good cybersecurity person, and I am on no social media platforms, right? So I have, right? I'm on LinkedIn.
I'm on nothing. I actually don't even have an internet connection at my house.
I do not have Facebook. I do not have TikTok. I don't have any of those accounts.
Okay.
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Didier Jourdain, simple. There's a few other Didier Jourdains, surprisingly, but you should be able to find me. I'm the only CISSP Didier Jourdain.
Okay, cool.
And I have the Jourdain Risk Group as well on LinkedIn, and you can go to the JordainRiskGroup.com. Also, you can go to DDA@JordainRiskGroup.com. Those are the best ways to get in contact with me.
All right, Didier, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
All right, guys, thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to follow and subscribe and rate us 5 stars. Also, share with a friend. If you do, who knows, there might be a Backtable hoodie in your future. If you have questions or comments, DM us. We're @_BacktableIND on Instagram, LinkedIn, X, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Backtable is hosted and produced by myself, Anish Parikh,
and Ruchika Talwar.
Our production team is led by Kieran Gannon,
Aaron Bowles,
Gabe DeGrazio,
and Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Ann Dang.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.